What's going on, y'all? It's the kid FortWorthFabian, BigBossFabo. I'm back with a reaction video for you guys, and today I'm actually going through this documentary, Jim Croce, Behind the Music. And is that how you pronounce it, Croce? Let me know if I completely slaughtered that in the comment section below, but we're doing the Behind the Music documentary. And I'm not sure where this aired from. Was this VH1 or... But a little bit of a description. Jim Croce, January 10th, 1943 to September 20th, 1973. American singer-songwriter. Between 66 and 73, Croce released 5 studio albums and 11 singles. His singles Bad, Bad, Leroy Brown, and Time in a Bottle were both #1 hits on the Billboard Hot 100 charts. I've actually done a reaction to Bad, Bad, Leroy Brown. I wonder if I have enough videos to have actual playlist, but... continuing on, September 20th, 1973, the day that his ABC single, I Got a Name, was released. Croce, Muheslian, and 4 others were killed in the crash of a chartered Beechcraft E-18S upon takeoff from the Natchitoches Regional Airport in Natchitoches, Louisiana. Okay, Natchitoches. Yeah, I'm familiar. Sister to Nacogdoches. Croce had just completed a concert at Northwestern State University Prather Coliseum in Natchitoches and was flying to Sherman, Texas for a concert at Austin College when the plane crashed about an hour after the end of the concert. So, yeah, I do believe I have done a few reactions to Jim Croce. Yeah, I do remember Bad, Bad, Leroy Brown. Let me just take a quick look at my catalog to confirm. But I'm excited to do this documentary, man. I actually did a poll on my community tab, on my community page, and people had, you know, it's kind of a landslide in comparison to the other documentaries that were up against this one. So I appreciate the feedback and you guys letting me know this is y'all's preference. So yeah, Bad, Bad, Leroy Brown. I did this back November 15th, 2020. So yeah, man, this is Behind the Music, the documentary. Without further ado, we're going to hop right into it, man. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, FortWorthFabian. It's the road to 1 million subscribers. Peace, love, prosperity, everybody that's been rocking with the channel, man. We're about to hit 22K. So keep engaging with the content. It only helps me, you know, push in the YouTube algorithm. So like the video, share the video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already subscribed. So let's get it.
With 3 albums and 5 top 10 hits, Jim Croce established himself as the...
My fault, y'all. It's Jim Croce. I'm over here saying Jim Croce. Jim Croce.
Voice of America's working class.
Well, the south side of Chicago is the baddest part of town. And if you go down there, you better just beware of a man named Leroy Brown.
Yes, sir.
Croce was one of these guys who told our story. When we heard songs like Time in a Bottle, when we heard, you know, Leroy Brown or something like that, he was reminding us in verse who we were and what made us so special.
Yes, he was better than old King Kong and meaner than a junkyard dog.
What appeared to be Jim Croce's overnight success took a lifetime to achieve. When he finally became a superstar and hit the road, his private life paid the price.
He belonged to the road. He was no longer ours anymore. Life became an abrupt and lonely place for me.
And just as Jim decided that being home was more important than living on the road, his life came to a tragic end.
And I thought, man, you know, what a shame. How does it happen like this?
When Jim Croce died in a tragic plane crash at the age of 30, he left behind a 2-year-old baby boy who would never know his father, and a devastated wife who always knew that time wasn't on their side.
I don't know why this is so reminiscent. Like, I guess maybe this is a similar story to a lot of artists who passed away. I did a Leonard Skinner. Was it Leonard Skinner? I'm not sure. I believe it was. And obviously the story of that band, right? But this story just seems so familiar, man. I don't know.
I guess there was a sense that I had from the minute that I met Jim that it couldn't last forever.
Tonight, a VH1 exclusive, the triumph and the tragedy of Jim Croce.
Now, a lot of these artists, man, do be passing away young. I don't know what it is. rarities. Uniqueness is something that's valued and beautiful. You know what I mean? It don't last forever. A lot of these stars, these artists, it's crazy. So many, it just don't seem coincidental. I don't know what the association is, but like the frequent untimely demises, man, they're different, man. They're different. It's mind blowing. But you see so many similarities in the artists. It's like, why does the story have to kind of repeat itself? But I don't know. There's a lot of battles or demons that these artists and creators fight with, in addition to the whole conversation. So I don't really attribute, everything to one thing. Behind the Music Marathon. Yep,
The
VH1.
world gained a new folk hero this year. You don't pull off the Lone Ranger's mask, you don't tug on Superman's cape, and you sure don't want to mess around with Big Jim Croce.
Uptown got its hustlers.
The year was 1973, and Jim Croce was at the height of his career. After years of playing in dive bars, struggling to make ends meet, this ordinary man was finally on his way to becoming an extraordinary star.
You don't pull the mask off old Lone Ranger, and you don't mess around with Jim.
It was a balmy evening in the bayou, and Jim Croce had just finished a concert in Natchitoches, Louisiana.
Natchitoches.
He put on a show that was beyond belief. The people there, I mean, he must have had 3 encores that night.
As his chartered plane lifted off, the twin-engine Beechcraft suddenly slammed into a row of pecan trees at the end of the runway. Within seconds, Jim Croce and 5 other people on board were dead.
I had a lot of anger when Jim died. I had a lot of anger. I missed him terribly, and I was angry at him, and I was angry that he had died. And
What'd
I was
he do?
angry at the whole business.
It's not his fault.
Now, close to 25 years later, the original landing strip has been replaced and the pecan trees have been cut down. What remains is the music and the poetry of Jim Croce. This is his story through the eyes of the people who knew him best.
So he a Louisiana boy? I was going to say, where he from? He's a Louisiana boy. Okay, Natchitoches or Natchitoches, however y'all pronounce it, man. Very familiar because, I'm familiar with Natchitoches, and I feel like that's the borderline, right, where those two cities meet, and it's like Louisiana and Texas. But Natchitoches and Natchitoches, whatever, you know what I mean? But I had taken a trip out to SFA at one point in time with my buddy, and yeah, we obviously that's where SFA is, in Natchitoches, Texas. So interesting that he's from there, Not Texas, of course. He's from Natchitoches, Louisiana. Or is he? I don't even know at this point.
His wife Ingrid, his blue-collar buddies, and closest friends Cheech Marin and Arlo Guthrie.
Cheech Marin.
I don't know that he
No
saw
way.
himself as being that unique. He saw himself as being a regular guy. And in those days, that really meant something.
Yeah, well, the streets are all part of his blood.
I didn't know he was cool with Cheech Marin,
Part
though.
of mine as well. And it was exciting for us. It's sort of titillating to be out on the streets.
And we'd close places. We'd stay up till it got light. And I really miss that. I really, really miss that.
Well, Jim's slogan that he used a lot is, if you dig it, do it. And if you dig it a lot, do it twice.
But there was a serious side to Jim Croce, his music.
Young
Jim's
Gunna.
earliest influences came from his family. The Croces were a close-knit clan from South Philadelphia. Music was a major part of their lives, and they always seemed to be singing and dancing.
Okay, so they from South Philly. What's the association here? Obviously, they may break it down, or of course they will, but South Philly?
Something tells me that you and I should get together.
By the time Jim was a teenager, anyone who came in contact with him couldn't help but notice that this kid could sing. In this recording from an early 1950s church talent show, it was obvious that Jim Croce was a born entertainer, a natural.
'Cause you're home, you know you're out to sea.
He sang to please people, but he also sang because it gave him an incredible joy. He would play music 20 hours a day, fall asleep, and wake up and play more. That was what he lived for.
Jim was the first in his family to go to and graduate from college. He paid for his education by juggling a part-time job driving a truck and playing in a band.
I've spent about 10, 11 years playing in bars, playing at parties, fraternity parties, doing rock and roll, country and western, bluegrass, just about every different kind of music you can think of.
While at Villanova University, Jim landed a job as a disc jockey at the school's radio station.
One of the queens of all-time blues singing was Miss Bessie Smith. Charlie Green, won't you play that thing?
It was there where Jim could play the music that his father played for him while he was growing up.
I know who blows the horn.
The lyrical tales of Pennsylvania miners and farmers. The hard luck stories of working class heroes. If Jim wasn't playing or performing music, he was listening to it, especially folk music. And that's what drew him to a local hootenanny, where he met a young singer named Ingrid Jacobson.
The local hootenanny.
I fell madly in love. I couldn't even imagine that life had ever existed before he walked into that room with that guitar.
Yeah, he was that
The year
guy.
was 1963. Ingrid was 16, Jim 19. They fell in love, and after a 3-year courtship, were married.
I mean, when you meet someone and you're 16 and you're madly in love, you're at a time in your life where your hormones are running your life, you know, and everything's emotional.
Fueled by that emotion, Jim and Ingrid embarked on their musical journey together, madly in love, but absolutely penniless.
It was the 60s.
Real
and
rider,
it
ride or
was a
die.
great time to be you and me against the world. We found out as we went along that it really was us against odds.
The odds of a young husband and wife team from Philly making their mark in the music business were astronomical. But the Croces were young,
That's
talented,
crazy.
and they were willing to take the gamble.
That's wild.
When we return, the Croces learn about the music business the hard way.
He didn't spend.
Why does everybody have to learn about the music business the hard way? It's crazy, right? It's crazy. It's a crazy thing. Everybody has to learn that way, but a lot of people do learn from prior artist mistakes. But so him and his wife were like a singing duet. Somebody fill me in here. What was going on here? That's pretty interesting, though. You just hit the road and just like together and just play music, dive bar to dive bar. If that was the case, respect. Takes a lot to balls up every night, you know what I mean, and just hit these bars, nobody knowing who you are, and pretty much just showing out every night.
Time in perhaps learning about what the business was about as well as he could have, which ended up ultimately getting him and us in a lot of trouble.
Then, how adversity inspired unforgettable music.
His songs had an instant depth to them, an instant life to him, because his life was.
Yeah, let's get to it. Let's get to it.
It was early 1970, and Jim and Ingrid Croce had been married for 4 years. After their wedding, they sang their way up and down the East Coast, finally settling in New York.
Nice.
But after their first and only record
Tough
together,
crowd,
didn't
tough
sell,
crowd.
the couple abandoned the big city.
We were sitting at our house and he was trying to figure out ways to make money because we just kind of knew that music wasn't the way we could make money.
Don't you know that
unfortunate reality. Nobody wants to accept that.
I'm Jim Croce, and I live here.
Jim and Ingrid escaped to a tiny farmhouse apartment in the rural Pennsylvania town of Lindale. This 1973 documentary provides a rare glimpse of the Croce's life on the farm.
You know, I've lived in a lot of different...
Hold on. He had a whole documentary shot off of him. So they must have had some type of credit or notoriety at this point in time if he's getting documentaries done on him. So it wasn't like, was it really a penniless lifestyle? How are you getting documentaries shot about you if you're really not that well-known of an artist? You know what I mean? So I'm kind of confused. If somebody can connect the dots for me here, fill me in, please.
Places, lived in cities, lived around the suburbs, and I really like living in the country.
The apartment was cheap and close to the small bars Jim needed to perform in to make a buck. But as he would recall later, there was more to performing in those bars than just playing music. There was self-defense.
And you work right on the floor, and they got you surrounded in a little chicken wire cage, so nobody hurts you with stuff that's flying through the air. One thing I've learned, though, is the guitar is really a great instrument of self-defense, you know.
Funny guy.
Life
I like
was difficult
it.
for the Croces, but things were about to get worse. Like many struggling artists, Jim was anxious to make it big. While recording in New York, Jim signed a series of contracts with representatives who promised to promote him and his music. It was a deal the Croces would later regret.
If you have a talent and a passion for making music as often as much as you can, you're not thinking about the business end of what's going on.
Well, you need to be.
Music in those days was not a business. It would have been interesting to see what he would have done when he would have figured that out.
I'm a dreamer
Wow.
by nature.
Crazy, the downfall. A lot of artists isn't, the ability to not make a hit song or, sustain through creativity. So a lot of times it's just a downfall through no solid team around them. Maybe finances fall through, you know what I mean? Sharks take advantage of the career and drive their career into the ground, It's crazy. Not to say this is that situation, but it happens.
Ingrid says Jim was angry that others were profiting from his music while he received almost nothing. Jim was on the verge of walking away from the music business. She says he was convinced that there was only one way left to make money off his guitars.
He was bartering and selling off all his guitars, just something to be able to make money. It was never going to happen, it seemed, that music would be the thing that would help us to survive financially. Music was going to have to be something that brought us a lot of joy, but it just didn't seem like we could ever make it in the music business.
Jim loved to
And that's a
perform,
tough pill
but
to
making
swallow.
$25 a night wasn't enough to support he and Ingrid. So by the summer of 1970, he was forced to take odd jobs just to make ends meet. He drove a truck, taught guitar, and became a construction worker.
He'd got in with the truck drivers and then the cement pourers, and then they would take him out on weekends, and he'd go to the roller derby, and he'd go to see Rapid Roy or the tattoo parlors.
Jim would tuck away his blue-collar experiences in his memory. He would one day write and sing about them. They would one day make him a star.
He's got a tattoo on his arm and say, baby. He's got another one that just say, hey. But every Sunday afternoon he is a dirt track demon in his 57 Chevrolet.
Melvin Goldfield was one of Jim's closest friends during those years. Melvin saw firsthand how Jim could turn a mundane moment into a classic song.
Well, we're standing in front of this old funky gate, that locked this old junkyard, and they kept a dog, to protect the junkyard. And the dog was trained to come, be ferocious. I think they fed him gunpowder to make the dogs really beastly, And its paws and its mouth would be under the gate, trying to get whoever was near the gate. And I said, man, this is about a mean junkyard dog, I guess he just found it was a good line for a song.
Meaner than a junkyard dog.
Jim was famous for collecting friends. Rarely a night went by when he didn't bring someone home to stay at the farm.
Jim had this wonderful ability to invite people that were in juxtaposition in life. He would love to invite a priest and somebody from, the Ku Klux Klan, and somebody from Roller Derby Queen, and maybe somebody who would come from a college professor, and he would, and then a lot of young girls that were really pretty and brought a lot of color to the party.
Jim and Ingrid's parties became legendary. Old friends, family, and a fraternity of struggling musicians would come to eat, drink, and play music. The Croce's little farmhouse became a musical commune full of people who would one day become legends. Bonnie Raitt, James Taylor, Jimmy Buffett, Randy Newman, and Arlo Guthrie.
It was just a part of my life that's sort of like a blur now. And I don't know if that's because we were doing things we shouldn't have been doing or something,
They was
We'd
turned.
have homemade dandelion wine, and we'd sit there.
Y'all
and
was
just
getting
say
lit.
hi
We
and
get it.
happy
We get it.
And enjoy the experience of, listening to one person. Hey, I got this great new song, and James Taylor would play a song for you.
We were young and we were free, and it didn't matter. And not only that, we didn't care. And we could have cared less if people were making money or not making money. We were having so much fun. and we were living so high off the hog. And I don't mean with driving fancy cars and stuff. I mean, we were dancing through life.
But even with all this music,
That
all
boy
this
was high.
inspiration, Jim Croce was in turmoil. He left songs half-finished and abandoned his dreams. Because of the contract he had signed, Jim knew he'd see little of the profit made from his music.
He didn't feel safe in writing. He was very scared that if he wrote something that he had to deal with the people up in New York, which he realized were not his friends. So he kind of swore off writing for a year because he was afraid if he did anything that they would take it.
Nevertheless, Jim believed that somehow, some way, things would work out. Ingrid wasn't so sure.
I was always, from the very beginning, very concerned about, well, wait a minute, we're playing this gig, but we don't have any money to get there. How are we going to do this? Oh, don't worry about it. It'll work out.
For years, it always did seem to work out. They had always managed to make ends meet when it was just the two of them. But the stakes were about to get higher. In December of 1970, Ingrid told Jim that she was pregnant.
The look on his face was sheer terror. There was this elation of the idea of immortality that came over him in the sense of the Croce name being carried on, but there was also this sense of responsibility that was about as far away from Jim's mind at that time than he could imagine.
Whether it was the fear of becoming a father or the new responsibility of having to provide for a family, a fire was ignited inside Jim Croce. He sat down at the kitchen table and began to write all of the stories he had heard, all of his life's experiences that he'd been saving. All of his creative juices finally began to flow. In a single week, Jim Croce composed a...
You can't force it. We all know that as creatives. You can't force it. Sometimes, man, those creative juices, when they're flowing, you just let them sit. You gotta let them bubble. You gotta let them marinate. You can't force it. When it's forced, it's not art. It's not really at its natural point. You know what I mean? So a lot of creators understand that they don't really force creativity or their art. They let it come to them, and that's when the most like natural, the most beautiful, however you really want to word it, forms of expression come about, in my opinion.
Lifetime's worth of music.
You
New
feel
York's
me?
Not My Home, Don't Mess Around with Jim, Rapid Roy, Photographs and Memories.
That boy was
and a song
going in,
dedicated
you
to
heard?
his unborn child, Time in a Bottle.
That one's a banger.
I think with Jim recognizing the birth of his own child, there was a sense of mortality that inclined him to write a song about immortality, in a sense. It was a turning over of his own life into another life.
I like that. Boy evolved.
Jim was about to have a family. He needed to make money. So he swallowed his pride, returned to New York, and began recording. Jim Croce had new music with a new
The Big
message.
Apple.
Don't mess around with Jim.
The thing that really made Time in a Bottle, or You Don't Mess Around with Jim, come alive was the sense of the gift, of giving this to someone that was going to be really important in his life.
For 8 months, Jim would split his time between recording in New York and being at home on the farm. Jim was preparing for what he saw as the two greatest accomplishments of his life, his son and his first solo album. Next,
His two babies.
Jim Croce's career takes...
Roy Brown, top of the charts. Operator, top of the charts. I have to tell you I love it. Boom, boom, boom. It was like he was firing rockets off, you know?
And later,
Abrupt and lonely place for me.
when Behind the Music returns. In September of 1971, Jim Croce was a proud dad, and he was singing his way to stardom.
I've got a name. I've got a name.
That screaming you're hearing back in there is my little boy Adrian James trying to sing. Do something. Let me call my wife and him out here. Hey, why don't you bring him out?
1 week after A.J. Croce was born, Jim hit the road. He had a family to support and a new album to promote.
And from that time on, he belonged to the road. He was no longer ours anymore. He went on the road and he performed probably over 300 concerts a year.
Sheesh.
And life became an abrupt abrupt and lonely place for me.
Jim's
That's
album
crazy.
was about to shoot up the charts.
The life of an artist on the road, especially 300. I mean, nearly a show a day. Nearly a show a day, but.
He had turned the colorful characters and experiences from his blue-collar days into his first gold album. But Ingrid says she and Jim were still living on a working man's wage.
It was kind of like the business was holding out this carrot.
That's unfortunate.
And they had him running after this carrot, and they kept saying, well, the money's going to come, the check's in the mail.
Jim may not have been seeing big money from his record sales or concert appearances, but he was earning the respect of thousands of fans. He and his best friend and guitar player, Maury Muehlheisen, were starting to fill stadiums. Their folk rock sound was catching on. Jim was becoming the kind of celebrity that celebrities wanted to see.
Went and sat down on the show, and he just proceeded to just knock me out, man.
Cheech Marin of Cheech and Chong fame became fast friends with Jim Croce after meeting him backstage at a concert.
His music was incredible. He was funny. He captivated the audience. He and just two guys, and him and Murray together, and he was singing all that. And it was really deep songs, and songs that way different from Bad Bad Leroy Brown.
Boy was getting stoned.
His top 40 commercial hit.
By the end of 1972, Jim Croce had made it to the brink of superstardom. Bad Bad Leroy Brown was about to claim the #1 spot on the charts, and Operator wasn't.
There's no way he's still broke at this
Came out
point.
with that first hit, boom.
There's no
Leroy
way.
Brown, top of the charts. Operator, top of the charts. Have to tell you I love you some. Boom, boom, boom. It was like he was firing rockets off, you know?
He'd gotten huge. He'd gotten really huge.
Operator, well, could you help me place this car?
Dude's
And
voice
while
is
Jim
smooth.
and his partner Maury were traveling the world, Ingrid and Maury's girlfriend Judy Coffin were feeling isolated back on the farm, trying to cope with the loneliness.
It was very taxing on one's ability to keep your house and home together and keep your life balanced when you realized that all this traveling was going on and they were meeting people that you didn't know and making connections and having relationships with people that you only heard about maybe secondhand. And you knew that they were stressed out in their lives, and it was just a crazy life of big contrasts, extremes.
But in looking back at the places I've been, the changes that I've left behind.
For Jim, life on the road was exhausting and exhilarating. He loved experiences both good and bad.
Learn the hard way every time.
And on the road, there were plenty of both. Jim Croce was a long way from the farm.
I don't think Jim was any different than anybody else on the road. I think that it was, like I said, a fraternity of musicians that had their own way of enjoying their lives. People did have a lot of opportunity to dabble in things that would take them to places they couldn't get on their own.
Have a good time, and yeah, I mean that's a musician's life anyway.
He knows what's up.
Especially if you're on the road, which he always was and we always were, you know. That's funny because we used to meet, we never met each other in LA, very seldom. We'd always meet each other in New York or Chicago or something. Oh, and it was always like, oh, man, you have an old friend that was in town.
By early 1973, Ingrid missed her husband terribly. She had been home alone raising her son for
Please
over
tell
a
me he
year.
making some cake at this
To
point
make
in time,
matters
though.
worse, Ingrid was hearing Jim's songs on the radio and seeing him on television. Still, they had very little money. When
Come
Jim
on,
returned
bruh,
to the
really?
country for a one-week vacation,
He really got finessed out his deal. He's blown up as a superstar. He still got little money. He's on TV, radio, etc., whatever's going on. He really got finessed out of his deal.
Ingrid confronted him.
The dollar thing started to come in, and I said, Jim, I don't understand, you know, what is going on? You're working like a crazy person on the road, and we don't have any more money than we had when we were singing college concerts 2 years ago. And, you know, he said, I know, I don't want to talk about it. It's all going to be okay. And, you know, and I would press, and that's something that I learned you didn't do with Jim, especially after having been on the road.
After confronting Jim, Ingrid broke down. She felt isolated and alone.
I laid in bed and cried that night. I was very, very upset. I'd missed him so much, and there were so many things that we couldn't discuss because everything was stopped if you asked a question. And he went downstairs and he started to play, and like
He wants
always did, pick up
peace.
a
He
guitar
don't want to
and
be
wrote,
nagged.
I'll have to say I love you in a song.
Well, I know it's kinda late. I hope I didn't wake you.
And the next morning he came upstairs early in the morning and sang it to me. Jim was unable to really express himself when he talked to you. He was a great listener, but he didn't bare his soul to many people.
Every time I tried to tell you, the words just came out wrong. So I have to say I love you.
Boy got a fierce, mean pen game.
He had one of those faces that when you looked into his eyes, you realized the guy had lived. You know, the guy, there was pain in his songs. They were funny and they were warm, they were wonderful because of the life he had lived.
I like that.
It was August of 1973. Jim and Ingrid knew that things had to change. They had to get better. So in an attempt to escape the isolation and loneliness of the farm, they decided to start a new life in California. The Croces packed up everything they owned and moved to San Diego.
Well, I always just wanted it normal. I mean, I tried to move to a place in San Diego called Normal Heights just to get normal.
Despite the move, Jim was still constantly on the road. His long absences were taking a terrible toll on the marriage. Jim Croce took a hard look at his life and decided it was time to stop.
We were looking at a photo of Jim that a friend of ours had taken. It was the ultimate photo of Jim. It showed Jim in the Jim Croce that everybody knew and loved. And he looked at that picture and he saw the wrinkles around his eyes and he saw his mustache and it was kind of scraggly and the cigar in his hand. He said, "Oh my God, look how old I look." And he couldn't really believe that life had gone by so quickly.
Jim Croce sat down and wrote a letter.
Dear friends, my cup got so full it overflowed and I had to empty it to really learn about life and what it means to me.
He wrote the letter to Ingrid. He wrote it to his friends. He wrote it to himself.
I now want to be the oldest man in the world with a face full of wrinkles, of wisdom, and a lot of cross-the-board buddies. One thing I don't want to become is intense. It's the first 60 years that count, and I've got 30 to go. Be cool, Jim.
He said the first 60
Jim and Ingrid
years.
spent one final night together
Come
before
on, bro.
he left for what he promised would be his last concert tour. They walked the streets of San Diego. Jim and Ingrid talked about all the things they had done together. They talked about the difficulties. They talked about their son. But mostly, they talked about their future.
He was ready to get out of the business. He hated it so much. He hated the touring and the contriving of all the things that were part of the business, and the lies and the pretense of all the things that had been promised to him over the years about how he was going to make money and how it was all going to be okay.
Jim and Ingrid had no way of knowing that walk together would be their last.
Ah.
Next, the day Jim Croce died.
I picked
And later,
that door.
Oh, don't give it all away, gang. Yeah, man.
By early September of 1973, Jim Croce was more famous than he had ever imagined. He had 3 hits on the top of the charts.
Boy had
The
them
single Time in a
bangers.
Bottle about to be released, Jim's music would become more popular than ever.
But that's not the way it feels.
Wherever we went, people recognized Jim's music and they recognized Jim. And it did. It happened, I think, for the most part, for people overnight.
With a renewed lease on life, Jim was intent on completing his 6-month road trip, and then he planned to return home to his wife and child for good.
I had just got out from the county prison doing 90 days for non-support. Tried to find me an executive position, but no matter how smooth I talk, he wouldn't.
I just can't believe he wasn't making no money like that. That's crazy to me.
On his
They had
final road trip,
finessed.
Jim played to packed houses across the country. He was a star now, far too big to play a small gig in rural Natchitoches, Louisiana. But Jim Croce was a man of his word.
I don't get the
Jim
association
never
with
canceled
the
a tour,
Natchitoches.
So he was determined, even though he was going to lose money on the gig, to do this job.
1 year before Jim hit it big, he had been forced to cancel a performance at Northwestern State University in Louisiana due to an illness. Unable to sing, he had promised the promoters that he would make up the show as soon as he could. This was his chance to
Oh,
fulfill that
wow.
promise.
You can imagine having had planned on bringing Jim Croce in when he was an unknown and finding that a year later he was this big star with, you know, 2 songs on the top of the charts, and you're getting him for $750 to bring to your college buddies. I mean, they were pretty excited.
I mean, he enjoyed the ride in my convertible that afternoon like a 16-year-old. I mean, it was a grin from ear to ear, like, how sweet is life?
Doug Nichols was a student at Northwestern State
Oh,
University
gang.
and the concert's promoter. He will never forget the day he and Jim Croce met on this runway.
It was a good feeling. Truthfully, I was there for one reason. He's a celebrity. Hey, let's face it, who don't want to meet a celebrity? And I mean, I have booked it. We were spending money. He was a star.
The date was September 20th, 1973. Jim planned to play this concert, finish the tour, then he would go home for good, and Ingrid couldn't wait for him to get there.
I was being a mom. I was taking care of a young man who was 2 years old and wanting to run everywhere all over the grounds and get into everything.
Like he had done so many times before, Jim Croce picked up his dressing room phone and called his wife.
And I picked up the phone and he said, "Hi," and we talked, and I said, "Jim, I gotta run, I gotta go." And I never did this on a phone because it was just always so great when he'd call. I want to hear everything that was happening. But it was one of these things where I felt, you know what, he's going to be back. So we're going to have time.
Jim Croce left Ingrid with one final message.
And there was a pause and he said, "I love you." And that was the last time that I spoke to Jim.
Oh, that sucked.
A Jim Croce concert in Little Natchitoches, Louisiana was a big deal. Prather Coliseum on the campus of Northwestern held an audience a fraction of the size Jim was used to.
So this was his last show location. He wasn't born there. I was way off to even address that association. I guess this is his departing flight before he passes was Natchitoches. It wasn't, because he's a Philly kid, right?
To playing for. But that didn't faze Jim Croce. He had his guitar, and he was ready to play.
Hey.
Photographs and memories, Christmas cards you sent to me, all that I have are these to remember you.
He played his heart out, brought the few that were there to their feet more than once.
Boy left it all on stage, you get me?
I went to sleep that night, and I remember looking in the mirror. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw behind me this photograph of Jim that we had been looking at together. And before I went to sleep that night, I kept thinking of all the things that were going to happen in our lives and all the things that we wanted to see to fruition. And I laid down and I couldn't sleep that night. I had this dream and it kept going over and over and over and around in my head. It was almost as if in this dream, this whole thing that was going around and around in my dream was kind of like the end of the record.
This may very well be the last photo ever taken of Jim Croce. He had closed his show with an encore performance of Time in a Bottle. And despite the small crowd, Jim Croce...
They said an awkward performance, though?
She was on an emotional high.
If I could save time in a bottle, the first thing that I'd like to do is to save every day till eternity passes away, just to spend them with you. If I could make days last forever, if words could make wishes come true, I'd save every day like a treasure, and then again I would spend them with you.
Jim and Maury climbed aboard their chartered plane. They buckled in, the engines started, and the plane began to taxi. Jim Croce was headed to another show in Texas, but he would never arrive. Jim Croce would never see his wife or his child again.
About 4 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang. And I picked up the phone, and it was my stepmother. And she said to me, "Are you all right?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "There was a plane crash. I was just watching the Today Show, and there was a plane crash." And I said, "And Jim's dead, right?" She said, "Yes, everyone on the plane died."
Said, "Doug, Jim's plane's gone down. Don't look like there's no survivors." And I said, "His plane can't gone down." I just shook his hand and put it on the...
Oh man, I said his plane can't go down. I just shook his hand. Ain't no way. Not to make fun of bro, but dang. I felt that when he said that his plane can't go down.
Said, "Doug, Jim's plane's gone down. Don't look like there's no survivors." And I said, "His plane can't go down." I just shook his hand and put him on the plane.
It's like
As the plane had begun its takeoff,
bruh,
one of its
I felt
wings
that.
clipped a tree.
It's like the plane never gained enough height coming off the runway
What?
to go over the top of the pecan trees.
Oh
Jim Croce,
wow.
his friend Maury, and 4 others aboard the twin-engine Beechcraft were killed instantly. News of the
Come
tragedy
on,
spread
man.
quickly.
It was one of those moments when you go, what? It's like, it's not real. And I don't remember what I was doing. I just remember somebody said, you know, Jim Croce just died. And it was like, huh? That can't be. And I thought somebody was
crazy.
kidding. I thought somebody was just making it up. You know, another one of those disasters, you know, like, you know, there had been a few people that had been killed that way, and, you know, and planes going down or something, but that was rock and roll people. I mean, it didn't happen to folk singer types.
I was about to step on stage. I can't remember where it was. Someplace. And we were just standing outside the auditorium or in the little waiting area, you know, when we were ready to go on. Somebody came and said, "Hey, did you hear this news? Jim Croce died in a plane crash." And I went, "What?" And then the guy says, "Okay, you guys, you're on."
Heck nah.
I swear to God, it just happened that quick. I went, I'll deal with this later. And I went on and I did the show. And I just had to do the show, and it came off, and I went, whoa.
He wasn't ready for this. You know, he should be here. He wasn't ready for that day.
Ingrid, in the meantime, had to explain to her 2-year-old son that his father wasn't coming home.
I told him right away. I don't know if he understood it, but he seemed to understand it. And I think that was, without question, for me, the saddest part of it all. I just wanted so much for AJ to have a family.
Less than 1 month after Jim's death, Time in a Bottle hit #1 on the Billboard charts, and 3 of his albums would eventually make it to the top 10. Jim Croce may have been gone, but his music wouldn't let us forget.
Legend.
It wasn't long.
So
maybe
many
a month
legendary.
or-
Why is there all these legendary folks that be passing away early, bro? They be breaking all these records, be doing all this fantastical stuff, and it's just like, dang, like that, they out.
Too, after he had died, that it was like Jim Croce was the only thing on the radio, and all of a sudden everybody was singing his songs.
You'd hear his music everywhere.
It was a big deal when he died because he was going up, and
That's
he
a
wasn't
fact.
leveled off. He wasn't going down. And when somebody's going up, we all have expectations, and the world had expectations. People had things happening for him, you know.
Wow.
Next, Ingrid struggled to win back control of her husband's music. And AJ Croce.
His son and his music.
That's crazy. Hey, young Jit took over father's footsteps.
Billy Joel on Fame.
There's an upside and a downside.
The good.
The heck is
really
this?
Ugly. VH1 Behind the Music.
Billy Joel.
Shocked the hell out of me.
VH1 Behind the Music.
Don't you know
It took me many, 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 many years to accept that Jim was gone.
Oh, when I woke up from a dream, it was gone.
Gone since 1973, Jim Croce's stamp on the American music scene is immeasurable. And so is his impact on those who loved him. Decades later, the memories of those who were close to Jim Croce haven't faded.
Gosh, I remember standing in that window, in that door, when AJ was born.
This is Ingrid Croce's first trip back to the little farmhouse where she and Jim shared their life together.
It's really pretty much the same in a lot of ways, you know. This is the old outhouse.
Still standing are the structures of Jim Croce's past. This is where virtually all of the photos of Jim and Ingrid's life together were taken. From the brick wall where Jim stood tall, to the grassy field where the Croces posed for their family photo, to the famous outhouse window that appeared on his first album cover.
Well, it's probably not in as good condition as it was in when we were here, but not too much worse. It's neat. Take a look in there. Jim was going to make that an office, if you can imagine.
As for AJ Croce, he's a musician and songwriter with a record deal. And like his dad, AJ's got a style that's very
crazy.
much his own.
He looked just like him too.
But AJ says he can't help but be influenced by his dad's songwriting.
The thing that I love most about his music was the storytelling. It's the key to what I do. People come up to me often and tell me how moved they were by his music, and I can't tell you the number of people that have come to me and said that they remember the day that he died.
After Jim's death, Ingrid went to court and fought for the right to examine the financial records pertaining to Jim's career. Ingrid Croce was determined to discover how much money Jim's music had generated.
I've always felt that people need to fight for things that they believe in.
For sure.
It was
fact.
very, very important to me to understand why Jim had to have been away so long and doing the things that he did.
After
Boy,
years
was
of litigation,
making that
Ingrid
money.
is finally confident that she is receiving the money she and Jim worked so hard for. But even now, Ingrid has little good to say about the music business of that era.
It wasn't a time when people's lives were really valued, at least not in the industry that I was part of.
It took Ingrid Croce years to come to grips with the loss of her husband. Today, she is remarried and operates a restaurant dedicated to the memory of Jim. Located smack dab in the heart of San Diego, Croce's is on the same street where Jim and
San
Ingrid
Diego.
took their final walk
Nice.
together. It is there she displays the many reminders of her life with Jim. As Ingrid looks back, however, it is the first song he ever sang to her that puts it all in perspective. This recording has never before been made public.
And I'm just a country boy. Money have I none.
Copyright on this must be crazy, on. You know what I'm saying?
The song is called I'm Just a Country Boy. It tells the story of a simple man with no money, but an abundance of love. Jim Croce was not a simple man.
That boy
but
had
his
heart,
dreams
though.
were.
He had heart.
He looked for happiness and found it in making others happy. In a sense, Jim Croce wrote the soundtrack for his own life. And in the process, with each note, each lyric, each story, we all learned a little something about ourselves.
All I could afford is a loving heart, the only one I own.
He picked out all of the heroes and the heroines, all of the people, all of the things that make our lives rich and unique, and you realize that in everyday life, you don't have to be a Hollywood hero. You don't have to be a fiction. You don't have to be made up. There are fabulous characters everywhere, and he had an eye for picking them out. He knew he was one of them.
Well, I think the Jim Croce legacy probably rests within a lot of individuals in their own hearts. Fortunately, his music is spread out and lots of people enjoy his music, but him, the man, I think sort of just a personal gratitude to have been a friend of his.
I think he believed every word he said when he said, if you dig it, do it, and if you dig it a lot, do it twice. He did it thousands of times. He did it as many times as he could.
That's good advice. If you dig it, do it. If you dig it a lot, dig it twice. Yeah, you feel me? Put in that work, yeah.
She's living in LA.
Jim Croce, Behind the Music. That's it right there, man. Let me know your thoughts on that one in the comment section below. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, FortWorthFabian. It's the road to 1 million. Jim Croce, Behind the Music, man. Definitely had some hits, some bangers, man. Great talent. RP to him. You know, condolences to the family. But, you know, another talent gone too soon, and you wonder, you know, kind of where his career would have went, what he would have done if he had those extra 30 years that he was referencing, you know. It's cool that he did want to kind of see himself grow old and spend time with his family and kind of, you know, remove himself from the music business in order to kind of have that family time generated. But, yeah, hopefully his family has gotten, you know, their just due in terms of residuals or whatever finances is owed to them. Yeah, man, but let me know your thoughts on the documentary below. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Continue to recommend additional documentaries you want to see. Yeah, man, we'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace, love, we're out.